First of all, welcome, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. I am asking if folks could just keep their microphones muted, and then we'll have chance for questions and answers later on in the presentation. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm going to turn on my camera just for a moment to say hello. So hello, I'm Dr. Mary Claire DiGiacomo. I'm the Assistant Executive Director at ACCET, and I have put together this presentation together with my colleagues Maya and Christina. So I'm going to pause my video in a moment, turn it over to Maya. The reason we're not using video extensively throughout is just we found that Zoom and the internet has just been really at capacity, and we think that the presentation will be of better quality if we just focus on the content. So I'll stop my video and turn it over to Maya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maya Rasmussen, and I am an accreditation coordinator here at ACCET. I will be moderating our Q&A this afternoon or this morning, depending upon where you're joining us from, of course, across the country and world at this point. And I will also be back in a little bit to cover some further sections. So thank you for joining us, and make sure you're texting your questions throughout the program. Like Mary Claire said, we'll hold those till the Q&A at the end, but we will be acknowledging those as they come in. So please feel free to shoot us questions as we go. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maya. So it looks like everyone has found the chat function that should be on the bottom screen of your computer. And I'm glad everyone can hear. Just let us know if there are any issues along the way. We think this presentation will be about 45 minutes, which is not a terribly long amount of time, but there's a lot of information to cover. We are going to be recording the presentation so that we can share it with our members. And however, at the end, when we do our Q&A, we'll turn off the recording at that point. And as Maya mentioned, we'll be going over the questions at the end of the presentation. Frankly, we're kind of, let me back up a little bit. Just to say, Christina was not able to join us for this presentation. However, she contributed greatly, and we appreciate that. And also, as the title slide says, interactive distance learning for ACCET vocational institutions, and we say in case of emergency, which is where we're at right now. What we're going to do is provide a lot of information. This presentation is text heavy, so we're kind of breaking our instructional design rules with this presentation with lots of text and limited interaction. But we have a large number online and a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So this is just going to be some guidelines for you, some information, some resources to help along the way. And of course, we'll continue to be a resource for you in the coming weeks. So today, we will cover the following. So we'll go over the parameters, questions you should ask yourself at your institution, regulatory requirements. We'll provide some guidelines regarding technology that's needed, how to communicate, how to cover the content in your courses, and how to assess your students. We'll also provide resources, federal guidelines, just some general resources in general about how to teach online, and resources for instructors. So as we said, please send in your questions. We'll get to them at the end. We're limiting it to text only, so if you would add your questions to the chat, that's where we'll go with this. As I said, we found with the internet and audio, it's been such a challenge with the quality that we're finding that for this particular presentation, this is just how it's going to work best for us. Okay, so we'll talk about parameters for going IDL and some serious questions to ask yourself. Is distance learning the right choice? Is it appropriate for your students and for your particular subject matter? Not all of your courses will translate well with IDL. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we get into the presentation. Will the students and faculty be better off with the distance learning experience? Will they be able to be successful at it? Or would it be better to temporarily close the school? Is that a consideration? We talked with some schools in Puerto Rico who experienced the hurricane, and one school in particular did a temporary closure, and they closed the school for 40 days. They stayed in contact with their students as best they could. A lot of times, of course, it's a different situation. We have communication, they did not. So a lot of times there were people going around talking with the students, but they kept in communication, and they had more than 70% of their students come back to school after those 40 days, but that's the option they chose. And they managed it with their core team of administrators and faculty. So it's something to consider. Will your students be successful with distance learning, and your faculty? Will all students currently enrolled be able to participate in distance learning? Can they accessing the content, complete the assignments? Those are things to be considered. Do they have the appropriate technology for that? So the Department of Education is where we're using their guidelines and helping to translate those to you, and as our guidelines at ACCET, because as you know, in IDL, you normally would have to apply to get approval to deliver your programs through IDL. The Department of Ed has allowed us to be flexible with that requirement. One thing we want to encourage you is to check their website frequently for updates. Things change often. Our presentation is based on the information that we best know as of last night and early this morning, but if things have come up since this morning or early afternoon, things can change. So check the website frequently. And also know that we will be posting things on the ACCET website, and we're working on a daily basis following what's going on with the coronavirus and how it's impacting education and how the department is handling it. The department recommends that you document as contemporaneously as possible any actions taken as a result of COVID-19. So they're not at this point saying you have to submit that to them as a vocational institution, but they want you to document things that you're doing differently, your process and procedures. So document that carefully. The department has granted on a temporary basis the use of distance learning or expanding it. So this is a temporary measure. As soon as they determine we're not in the emergency mode, then students would be expected to go back on campus to finish their programs. This flexibility applies to programs during the payment period that overlaps March 4th, which was the date they announced it, or the following payment period. So you have to kind of consider, and that's what they've said as of today. They may extend that if you have a shortened payment period, you know, and this continues on, which it very well may. I'm sure there'll be more flexibility and guidance from the department, but this is what their current stand is. Currently, the department's limiting the permission to distance learning opportunities developed for the purpose of serving students who are already in attendance. So that's important, or whose attendance was interrupted by COVID-19. So it's currently enrolled students. It is not being extended to new enrollees at this time. That may change, but not at this time. And then there's a subnote there that says, note that the flexibility is not available for clock hour courses that lead to licensure if the licensure body will not accept distance learning courses or hours, or give credit for them toward the number of hours a student must complete. So you'll need to look to the licensure body for guidance there. I don't know if they'll have flexibility or not. So to meet the parameters for the department's requirements, an institution must communicate to students through one of several types of technology, including email. And that instructors must initiate substantive communication with students, either individually or collectively on a regular basis. So this is not e-learning, this is interactive distance learning. There has to be interaction with your instruction. And we will provide some suggestions for that later in the presentation. And also communicate with ACCET. Let ACCET know what your plans are. So we have requested that, and we've had many institutions already just send us emails saying this is what we're doing. We have developed a new form. If you already sent an email, that's fine. But we have sent a new form to the primary contact that is listed in AMS and requested for that contact to complete the form. And it's just informational. It'll take less than 5 minutes. It's just indicating what your plans are if you're changing anything that you're doing. So stay in touch with us. And we also encourage you to stay in touch with your regional representative from the department too. Okay, I'm going to move on and talk about technology. So we broke it into splitting it between instructors and students. So we'll first talk about what we think and this is what we suggest. This is now Maya, Christina, and me. And I would like to add that the three of us have quite extensive experience with distance learning. Maya has a graduate degree in it, as do I. And I was a dean for general ed and online learning and have been doing online learning for many years. So we do have a background in it. So these are the things that instructors need to have: computers, reliable internet connection, speakers and a microphone. A headset is really good. They had a headset. It's a much better quality. Online delivery platform. We'll talk more about some of these in detail in the next slide. Visual support. Again, we'll talk some more, but that would be something like PowerPoint, for example, what we're using right now. Attendance tracking tools. So you're going to have to figure out how you're going to track student attendance. that's going to be important because you're moving to IDL. If you do, you still need to be able to demonstrate that you're tracking attendance. And Maya, just let me know, the form I mentioned earlier that you should send to ACCET is online emergency notification form. Okay, so back to this. So make sure that you can track attendance. And again, record grades. So if you have an online grade book already that instructors use, that's great. Nothing changes there. If you don't, then you need to think about some answers about how they're going to track their grades. I mean, I think most, if you don't have an online tool, would use something as simple as Excel. And then communication tools. We'll talk more about attendance, grade recording, and communication as we get more into the presentation. So these are some nice to haves for instructors. A high quality headset, a student portal. I think many of the schools already have student portals, and a learning management system. Again, many schools do have that, but we will talk a little bit more about learning management systems as well. Some more on need to have for instructors and kind of drilling into some of the things that we previously discussed. So an online delivery platform, these are free. Google Classroom, Google has great suite of tools. Google Hangout would be a wonderful way. We'll talk about that later too, but good delivery platform. Zoom, which is what we're using. Zoom has free accounts. And I think there's a limit of like 45 minutes per meeting with a free account. And you can share a screen. Just you're seeing Zoom in action. Adobe Connect, that is not free. Skype, and then YouTube with chat enabled. So those are some delivery platforms. Visual support, there's so much out there. You create PowerPoints. There are a lot of videos, TED Talks. We have resources that we'll post, but things like Khan Academy, there are a lot of online tools for visual support of the curriculum that your instructors would be able to use. Some more nice to have. The student portal, as we mentioned, you may already have this. It tracks attendance and grades automatically. Learning management system at this point, it is costly. It would take time to get set up. I think we're kind of we're kind of in an emergency mode. We're looking to do something quickly. But Blackboard does have course sites, which is free, and I think institutions can have up to 10 courses in Blackboard, and it's a great tool. And when I say Blackboard, I mean course sites as their free component of Blackboard. And then another LMS is Canvas. Okay, so some need to have for students. They need to have computers, reliable internet connection, speakers and microphone, tools for communicating with other students and with the instructor. And I mean, it doesn't have to be terribly sophisticated, so it can be email. You can use Google Hangouts like we mentioned before. There's various tools that are out there. Some nice to have for students, high quality headset, that student portal, and an LMS where they can see their attendance and their grading, their content and assignments, etc. All right, so next Maya is going to review communication. And I'm going to run the PowerPoint, so Maya will just let me know when to click.
All right, thank you very much, Mary Claire. So we're going to go ahead and jump in here. I'll have about 20 minutes for my upcoming section. So this is going to be as brief and bright as possible in that short of time. So please know this is kind of a high level overview at this point. We'll try to give some specific examples on these key points. But again, feel free to chime in with your own perspective from your best practices and make sure to keep those questions rolling in. So if I could right now, just to kind of get a sense of the room, if everybody at the bottom, those of you that are joining us online and watching the program, if you could please, where it says participants, go ahead and click that. And on your own name there, if I could get a hand raised, you'll see it's the blue button that says raise hand at the bottom. Can you please just go ahead and raise your hand now if you are prior to our emergency situation, if you were doing online learning and or e-learning or IDL, any of those, if you could go ahead and click raise your hand so I could see those hand raises. Good, good. Okay, seeing some coming in, seeing some familiar face, couple familiar faces, couple familiar names as well. Thank you. Kind of a good mix. So go ahead and just click raise hand again, those folks, to turn that off. So I should see a clear screen right now of all blue hands. Good, good. That's just a couple more, couple stragglers. I just want to be on the next one too. All right, so then go ahead, all of you who have not done any sort of online learning before, please go ahead again. At the bottom, we're going to click on participants on our black hover screen bar, and then we're going to click the blue raise hand button. Good. Seeing some new participants here who haven't done that before. Great, great, great. And then go ahead again, please just click that raise hand again to turn it off. All right, so we kind of know we kind of got a mixed audience here. So those of you, again, who've been doing this, feel free to chime in with your perspectives. But just to start with on communication, I really think this is really one of the largest points that I want to drill home besides structure as well. Communication and structure are so, so, so key to online learning experiences, no matter what the situation is, especially at a time like this. It's really kind of fascinating. A lot of the scary parts of online learning are kind of what we're feeling as a society and the whole world as a whole right now. You know, online students, the top complaint are that they feel isolated, that they feel overwhelmed, that they get frustrated, and that they really just need a little more help than the usual situation. So I think that's kind of an exact translation to, you know, what we're all feeling. So now more than ever, it's just important that you make this as easy as possible. We know too, a lot of you on this call have students that are in extremely challenging scenarios, no matter what is going on in the world. You know, they're balancing 2 jobs, family, just all these different demands. So now, you know, with the complete upheaval of their lives, you know, focusing on their education might be on the back burner, unfortunately, at this point. So we really want to do our best to make sure that your product, your passion for your students can continue to be delivered in just a different fashion. And if not, you know, those are, like we're saying, some tough considerations that need to be made. But then as far as the communications piece here, so if we're looking at on the need to have for instructors, we can go ahead and click so we can see. There's kind of the 3 main components for this presentation. We're going to talk about institution to instructors. We're going to do instructors to students and student to student. As it says for ACCET, this is really the differentiating factor between an e-learning program where your student is just interacting with their content and one where it's an interactive distance learning is our key there. So on that interaction, what we're speaking about at ACCET is that it's instructor to student and student to student. And like Mary Claire already touched on a little bit, you know, there are various ways and various sophisticated levels to do this. And so we're just trying to make sure the basics can be met in some of our cases, or, you know, step up what we're already doing in others. So to look at first, we're going to take institution to instructors. So what's key is this initial training for your instructors. They're going to need to make, as an institution, you're going to need to make some decisions and make sure that's communicated clearly down to every single individual that has a role in delivering education. So whether you're doing synchronous, which means that we're all meeting same time, same place every week, which might, for those who haven't done distance learning before, might be a better option at this point, just as far as scheduling. If your instructor's used to the 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., this is when our class meets, this is when we're going to meet online. Keeping that consistent, that might be a good option at this point. Or asynchronous is more where the student is free to interact with the material and other students. Still, it's structured in a way where it's broken down, whether it be by module, by week, whatever that factor is, but they're interacting with that content, not in real time, if you will. We'll have IDL teaching methods. Again, there's numerous different tricks to the trade that are developed throughout years and years of practice that, you know, instructors are just being thrown into this, or lots of folks are just being thrown into this, and, you know, it's just the reality of the situation, and that's what education and learning is all about. It's working within your constraints and kind of adapting to what the reality of the context is at that moment. So for that, looking at those teaching methods, again, we have a ton of resources that we'll include and send in a follow-up as well with some very pragmatic options, making sure it's set with their interaction with students, assigning classwork and homework virtually, technology requirements, which we talked about a little, content and online resources, which we'll get to in a sec, as well as kind of having to rethink what we do for assessments. So if we can go to the next slide. And the key point here is that it takes self-discipline and time management. Again, your student, they might have never participated themselves in this kind of learning, so they're on their own perhaps for the first way. Perhaps you have students who are unsuccessful in different educational settings before, so that again might be kind of a scary venture for them and something that you want to virtually hold their hand as much as possible at this point, because no matter whatever scenario, it's hard. Self-discipline and time management, you got to make sure to be on your game, because, you know, someone's not always there to be pushing you, so making sure that it continues to ring true. Then just to continue here with institution to instructors, as far as clear expectations, it's the same idea with your instructors, kind of what their idea of a work day is. It's kind of turned on its head as well. So communicating kind of those standing, you know, the daily stand-ups, the weekly meeting, hopefully, you know, the quarterly review, hopefully is perhaps can be delayed and such, but just kind of making sure, what does that communication structure look like now in this new environment? Communicating with students, really good practice is to have a virtual office hour where your instructors are available in one form or another, you know, dedicated time outside of the regular class hour for teaching. Just making sure all of these will get to as well, when and where to post course syllabi, handouts, recording attendance. How is attendance going to work? Like Mary Claire touched on, it's more about completion of the material through the week. But if you are counting attendance, what in a different, you know, if they're present at the live session, that's a wonderful option. But if that's not feasible for them and you're offering it in an asynchronous manner where it's pre-recorded and they're accessing, how are you counting attendance in that capacity if you don't have an LMS that can track their seat time, their play time, all of those features? Kind of, again, thinking through these decision points that need to be made, as well as how those grades are going to be reported and the attendance is going to be reported. Again, many of you are already using online student portals where you're tracking that already, so that helps abate some of those worries, but just thinking through in this new environment. So on for our next slide here. Oh, one more. IT support. See, we're all in this together. IT support resources, staff, faculty, and students. Where are each of those levels going to turn to when they need help? Who is the point person? When a student has an issue, what do? What's considered an emergency issue for your student? Who does that go to? Is there an instructor to go to? Do you have a dedicated line? Is there, you know, a common practice if you're working with an LMS? You would have a dedicated chat that is, or a discussion thread that is just for course IT concerns, that would list everybody's contact information in there, that would have help at the school level with all their IT concerns. And, you know, for a lot of our institutions that are smaller operations, it might be quite the burden on some different folks to have to step up in different ways in this time, but just kind of thinking through who that person is in each of those scenarios as well. And on to our next. All right, now we're going to look at our next point. So now moving to the two relationships that are required by ACCET. If I'm looking for instructors to students, and then again, we're setting expectations as far as we've talked about technology, we've talked about attendance, again, quantifying as much as possible what participation means. We'll talk about this in assessment in a little bit, but just here is what we were doing on the ground. What does participation mean now? If it's a discussion forum that gets set up, especially if you're doing asynchronous, where your students just go in and are posting to these threads, whether it's asking questions, when submitting assignments on time, and then as well as frequency of communication, like we talked about with instructors. A really good practice too, from the get-go in setting up just kind of the decorum of the class and how those electronic communications need to go. Some students are used to talking only in text, speak and write all the time, even in email consideration. So just, again, what is the expectation? If I email you, are you going to return it within 24 hours, 48 hours? How do I write that? How do I interact around expectations of communication? What is an appropriate way to foster conversation with my classmates when I'm in a class, you know, without attacking people, without telling people their ideas are stupid, just all of these conversations around conversations that might not have occurred. Again, they might have in the face-to-face class, but you're there, you can read the room, you can see, you can interject, you know, it's more of a presence. So it's again, it's asserting the instructor's presence while allowing these conversations to still occur. So thinking about those. And then again, online office hours, making sure there's dedicated time for support. And on to our next one. Just a little bit more here on instructors to student, and we'll be covering during the live session. And student, oh, kind of going. All right, there we go, back to participation during live sessions. So we'll be talking about how your instructor to the student, whether it's chat boards during lectures, again, acknowledging people's comments when they come in. Make sure, you'll see, it's interesting if you decide to go this route and you've already decided to go this route, you'll see some of your students that are your quietest learners actually are some of your most active online learners because they are more comfortable writing. You know, there's kind of a veil behind which they have a little more protection, you know, might feel a little more comfortable, might be a little more verbose with their text. So you'll see, you know, just making sure that everybody's opinion feels validated, making sure you can see participation when you cannot see it physically in the room. Cold calling of students is just with questioning, we'll talk about questioning, but just making sure, again, that everybody is participating. If these are general practices in the classroom, but just are really heightened when your main mode, you know, if students are on video too, that's perfectly great as well. But if you're just volunteer, you know, if your only way to hold conversations is via text, it really the questioning becomes the main participation and making sure you're fostering that from different individuals and knowing your instructors, knowing your students, which they do very well at this point, and knowing, you know, whether it be asking certain questions to lower level learners so that they feel successful and they're able to participate. Really good questioning technique of stating the question first, pause, then calling on someone, making sure to ask for someone's perspective after, you know, several different other individuals have already participated so they feel more warmed up. Just kind of all these basic questioning techniques that are part of instructional methodology already really come into play kind of 1,000-fold in this scenario. And like Mary Claire talked about too, whether it be class or group emails, text, WhatsApp groups, those with LMSs know that it's possible to set up dedicated teams within it for groups, for projects, or for discussion amongst themselves, whether it's an instructor decides to have specific meetings with smaller groups throughout the week, and that's a set schedule, whether it's during the class time, the instructor says, okay, go ahead and you're all on WhatsApp, you know, they've set it up clearly. They've laid out every step of the process in an email beforehand. It's very explicit direction, but, you know, if it's go ahead and take 20 minutes discussing your group via that channel, if that's the only mode available, just making sure that that interaction is occurring. And we'll talk a bit about posting of assignments, posting topics to discussion boards, and how to submit assignments and when. We're going to drill into all that a little bit more here as well. And just kind of more on student to student. And again, group work can be tricky with everyone's dynamic and with everyone having different demands that are heightened at this point. So just making sure if you set up group work, again, make the directions very explicit, help your students be present, perhaps the instructor at the first meeting, making sure they have very targeted objectives for what they're trying to accomplish actually during that group work time. It's not just, hey, meet and discuss what's going on, you know, because that's what happens sometimes. And then what are we supposed to be doing occurs over and over. So making sure even if you turn to group work, making sure those directions are very, very explicit as well. And we talked about group chats, student emails, etc. Making sure you have boundaries on that. And to continue, still going, content and assessments, there we go. So these are some more huge questions that you've been asking yourselves probably for the last month, and you probably hopefully come up, you know, with what the answers have to be at this point. Can you still meet your learning outcomes? And really the key is that can you still deliver the level of education that your institution is known for? Obviously, there's going to be some needed changes, or is going online not possible given whether it's your programmatic situation, or is it going to hurt your business more in the long run? How are we going to quickly adapt instruction to do so effectively? What kind of thinking is triaging here and bucketing? What can you bucket is able to remain the same? What needs modifying? What must be completely reworked or scrapped? And what you need to prioritize accordingly? And again, some changes when I'm looking at what do instructional delivery and learning activities look like now. Some major changes will be necessary, but there may be some things that don't need to change, some that you just need to rework, but you need to have the structure and the clear direction to make sure that happens. And moving on to our next slide. What's really critical in any online learning environment is that your daily learning objectives, your bread and butter, your teaching and learning is still driving the course, not the modalities, the technology, any of the technological enhancements that you may have. You don't need something with all the bells and whistles, but you do need to think through, like we said, what can stay the same, what needs to be updated, what needs to be scrapped completely. This is why you're in this world. You're in this world to help your students, and what you do is always in the name of what's best for student success. But like Mary Claire said, yeah, there's lots of tools out there with many different features to use, but don't let that overwhelm what's at the heart of your content and your students' learning. Because this is, you know, everyone is scrambling. Everybody's going to be trying their best. It's kind of from an instructional design background. It's our big no 101, never ever just take a course and plop it online. You know, but we don't have the luxury of 10 months, a year, 2 years to develop a course and make sure everything is perfectly aligned at this point, because this is the world, this is what's happening. So everyone's trying their best to decide if you can really take that face-to-face course and make it work. So when I'm looking at, can you go back actually, sorry. Thank you. All right, so if we're looking at what can stay the same, so for example, we know many of you already have PowerPoints and materials from your publishers that may be able to stay consistent. When I'm looking at what needs to be updated, for example, something like what does board work look like now? There are tons of tools and apps out there that you can, your instructor will be able to screen share that allow for drawing features. But again, that's going to depend on your instructor's comfort level. So if we're in kind of a let's get this done at this point mode, they could even, for example, they could draw their usual diagram on a piece of paper, take a picture, make it a slide, put it in the PowerPoint, and have that be the point where they would usually stop and walk to the board to explain. And will it be as perfect of an experience as it is in face-to-face? Probably not. They're trying their best. Everybody's new at this, but you know, that's one way to adapt something that isn't overly technological if you have some instructors that are very hesitant at this point to be able to try all these things. What needs to be, so that was for what needs to be updated. If I look at what needs to be scrapped completely, just concerns around like, do your students still have text? I know I've been to on some site visits where they only have classroom sets of text. Are there certain book assignments now that are no longer applicable? And I'm thinking through those considerations. Also here in the Voc world, we know there's a large component that are of our labs that are hands-on, so it wouldn't be feasible to have your electricians working at home on their trainer boards or allied health students practicing things that are very lab specific, having phlebotomists draw blood. Like, that's not possible in their home on their own work. That is very apparent, right? One that's up to the regulatory body, whatever the certification board, whatever ruling agency is in charge of that program in any capacity. You know, they have their different guidance, and you'll need to turn first and foremost to that. But you'll also want to know and kind of consider if there are other parts of the lab experience that you could take online. So whether it be video demonstrations of the techniques or online simulations, so you can just do data analysis in some way, whatever the pre or post work is. And if it's possible to save that actual physical practice part until you have access to the campus again. Or again, turn to your publisher, see what kind of online resources, see what kind of virtual labs are able to be investigated, what kind of tools they might have that could bring, either replicate part of the experience or the whole experience in some capacity, and looking at those different sources and again, making that decision on a case-by-case scenario. All right, and on to the next slide. And then for content for delivery, we've talked about synchronous, in real time, asynchronous, not in real time, or a combination of doing it live and then having the recording available. What's key here, accessible for all students. I know we spoke earlier, do your students have laptops? Starbucks is closed. We don't have the internet. McDonald's is closed. I can't go to McDonald's to use the internet. There aren't libraries right now to go use the internet. These are real challenges. You know, some people only have laptops from work, and even at different levels and, you know, across society, what their internet situation is in their home, in their apartment, you know, it might not be stable at this point. So it might be realistic that even, you know, or even if students do have iPads, laptops, a lot of their work might be being done on their phone. So what does that look like when they're trying to submit an assignment? What if they don't have a word processing capability? Are you making affordances for students to handwrite assignments, take a picture, submit it by JPEG to you or your instructor, sorry, each time your instructor, your institution? Is that a consideration that's being made? Like, these are kind of the real life options that they have right now. And also on the accessibility note, Mary Claire mentioned uploading videos to YouTube because they are able to be easily transcribed there kind of automatically. It's pretty not as convoluted of a process, but making sure that you're servicing all of your students across and meeting their accessibility needs so that they're able to continually access the education that they deserve. And again, manage expectations. No, it's not going to go well for some instructors. It's a brand new environment. You know, it's like starting over for some, and just knowing, you know, everybody's trying their best. But again, is it what's best for your institution ultimately, and making sure that it's crystal clear, knowing also trying to think through as many of these considerations as possible, and know that that course structure beyond in-class time has an elevated role. Like we're talking about with that content, just really thinking through preparing where the changes need to be, knowing for the content what the expectation of the instructor is. How does their compensation look at that point? What do they need to be doing on theirs, and what is on the academic directors, and kind of where that flexibility is, again, like a normal face-to-face consideration. making sure that continues. And like we talked about, interaction is also huge. So making sure that student engagement with material, instructor, other students, so we're doing the real-time polling, the discussion boards, chat room apps, collaborative tools, whatever it takes for that engagement, because you don't want to lose your students at this time and have them stop showing up. And that's a good point too with communication, which really we didn't touch upon, making sure you have that early intervention for staff purposes and for just making sure that's for student learning, making sure you know what that checkpoint is where you haven't seen a student in a session yet and knowing what's going on with them, making sure you have a way to reach out to them, and and making sure they're able to continue. And basic questioning techniques are even more critical. So it's really, like we said, you can't get the pulse of the room in the same manner. You can't see the on the students or that quizzical look on their face or those light bulb moments. Those aren't able to be seen as easily in this online environment. So it's really about making sure that you're asking as many questions as possible, involving as many folks in your course as you can. All right, and on to the next. Pam's given us some good ideas here. They have both IDL and residential, so it looks like you're setting out some mentor. Wonderful, wonderful, and adding a student survey every month for residential students to check in on learning outcomes, allowing makeup time for free to touch base on these outcomes once classrooms are back open. Wonderful. Again, it's just kind of knowing what can be put on hold in a bit, making sure those issues are flagged and making sure that follow through. There's a plan for that once normalcy is restored. Thank you, Pam, for sharing those. Again, everybody feel free to chime in. Then this is too, with academic work, huge on content, clear expectations, explicit direction, extra support. So what are your students submitting? What is the format? Are you allowing multiple formats? What are the parameters? Making sure it's clear how long something needs to be. This gets especially clear, we'll talk about discussion boards, but especially knowing this is how many sentences you need to write. This is the exact day by when you need to write this. Even on discussion boards, if you're using those, saying you need to post, nothing's worse coming from a class structure, making sure your week is structured in your class. So if you're doing a weekly structure, saying something's due by Friday. What does due by Friday mean? Does that mean due by Thursday, 11:59, or does that mean due by Friday, 11:59? So those directions need to be very explicit. So Friday, if it's Friday, 11:59, you write Friday, 11:59. If the course is going through Sunday at 11:59, it needs to be stated Sunday, 11:59. Or if there's something where you're expecting students to interact with posts or work that other students have given and give their perspective, you're again modeling what that response would look like, looking and saying what a constructive response would be, giving them an example of what that is, making it very clear so that you don't just have, great idea, Jimmy, thanks so much, agree, because that's the responses you're going to get half the time otherwise. So then just making sure that that can continue to happen in a way that is very structured. Another really good practice around clear expectation for format, parameters, everything is a lot of times in an online setting there would have been a week 0 before class starts where you just go on to the portal and you practice step by step how you access everything. Here is where you turn for more help. Here is where, I would practice making a post with my introduction about myself. So even in this scenario, if it has to be day 0 because of time constraints, making sure the instructor takes the time to thoroughly walk through how to access everything that the student is going to need. Making sure, again, on explicit directions on how are students submitting. What is the procedure? What is the deadline? How is it consistent? If I'm turning in an assignment via email, because that's my only option at this point because I don't have an LMS, are you setting up different emails for your instructor for every single course? Is there a certain subject line so that your instructor knows, just the same way that here's how you hand in your paper, here's how you hand in your classwork, I put it in your hand in class, then I go. That needs to be rethought through. It needs to be very explicit, otherwise it can be extremely extremely overwhelming to the overwhelming. Getting a little feedback noise there from someone. That's okay though. We'll keep going. So just making sure those directions and those manners are very explicit, making sure that consistency is key. You need to do this in the same manner every single week. Don't try to, trip up your student, make it organized in a different fashion at all. Just make sure this is how we do this. This is how we do this every single week. A good practice too for communication on this is that the instructor will send out an email every Monday saying, here's what's on tap for the week, just breaking down your overview of the week, making sure students know, here's the day where this is due, here's that expectation, here's the day this is due, here's that expectation. If you want to make a post, here's the day. Nothing's worse than trying to sign in on a Thursday and nobody's done their post, so you can't comment on anybody's post, right? So everybody's got to make their post by Thursday, and everybody's got to comment on 2 individuals' posts by Friday. Whatever it may be. Here is the link to our session. It is always going to be the link to our session. Even though it's always the link to our session, I'll still send it out every week on Mondays so you know to expect it. So you're not digging through your email trying to find it like all of us always are. It's the same consistency for your students. And then as far as any of the classwork too that you can't see, what can instructors do to preemptively help? That becomes extra important in this world as additional completed examples, more group work, anything that you can do to kind of give them more support. You got to know what they don't know before they don't know it, honestly, right? Because you're not there. Imagine that I don't get it moment becomes 46 emails for your instructor very quickly. And so thinking through, here's where the shortcoming will be, and here is what I'm doing to preemptively try to help, whether it be, again, more problems together. Here, if we're like in a medical math course of some sort, I'm working through this problem. I'm giving you on the homework sheet. I have an extra one worked through. Then I scaffold it's only halfway worked through. Just as much support in that capacity as possible will really help alleviate some frustration for your students. And on to our next. And then assessments, we're running short here, so I'll do this very quickly, but the big question continues to be, no matter what the modality, again, how are students showing mastery in a new environment? This is true for both formative, those checks along the way, and summative, your final assessments. So on formative, checking in on students becomes even more important. So if we talked about questioning, hand raises, going through problems together, summative, again, consistency is key, but also you don't want to have your instructor's course become flat because your students will get bored after a while. You're always saying, reflect upon what's important in your life. And if it's always the exact same, here, do these book problems 1 to 10, without the interaction, especially, it will get boring to them, and you don't want to lose students at this point. So mixing it up, especially for their output, seeing if there's different ways to measure to show you that they get it. So whether it be a test, whether it be a group project, journal, presentations, reading the sections, discussion posts, making sure they have multiple ways to show you what they know. And again, giving very specific guidelines for what needs to happen in each of those, what the expectations of length, time, words, whatever it may be, making sure that stays consistent. And on to our next. And then it also means rethinking what needs to change on your syllabus, especially around your grading breakdown, your overarching buckets of how they're assessed on their total grade, and what can stay consistent, what you need to rethink. Like we talked about participation, if they're doing the forums in some way, using a rubric is always a very strong, solid idea. There's thousands of them out there now for discussion posts, but that's just an example of that. And again, making sure your students know, just like in your face-to-face classes, what's the expectation of them and what kind of feedback will be given to them so they know. So if it's a daily assignment, are they getting it back with a check? Are they able to see in your system on the portal, are they able to see where that is checked? Any of that basic feedback so that they know whatever level it may be, how long am I going to have to wait to get this back? When your instructors provide feedback? Are they doing audio feedback? Are they grading it and uploading it? How are they seeing the corrections? How can a student access that? So that your student, again, doesn't feel like everything's just kind of going into a void and they feel lost at that point. And then looking to quizzes and exams, this is one where, again, you're going to kind of have to decide, can I adapt what we currently have so that it's still academically sound, or am I going to have to create something entirely new? Think about time limits. Or is it going to be, if you're meeting synchronously, is it only going to be the exam offered during then? Do you have any way? You just kind of assume at this point that it might have to be open book. You're not there to monitor them. You can't say, put your books away, you know, kind of that basic consideration. It's also possible if to tweak in some capacity, if you're using publisher exams, if it's possible to ask a question in a manner that's not a simple copy from the book, that would be ideal as well. But the whole point of what I've read is that for open book, the assumption becomes that if the student is able to access the material and get to that in a manner within a time limit, then you know that the student has actually done the reading. And so that was really the point of it. But just kind of, you know, again, scaling back your expectations on that and knowing it might not look like what it looks like in the classroom. And this is a good tool for making quizzes online with Google Forms. It's really nice when as much as possible, if something can be self-checking with all the new demands and take kind of that labor off your instructors. That's one way in which to make that happen. They can go and create it. It self-populates into a nice kind of output form. You know, lots of Google Colab options there. And really the big question, and like we've seen, you know, with the difficult question here with a lot of the labs, like we talked about, exactly how can you make that, these are all tailored more so for lecture courses, completely understood, but we're saying in lab, how can you make that authentic, meaningful, and relevant in this scenario, which may seem anything but. That's going to have to be kind of a course by course, institution by institution decision beyond, like we've said, trying to do as much of the everything but the hands-on part for your student, which totally understand is the most important part of that course. That's what we're saying. These are difficult decisions that have to be made where you're trying to demonstrate as much as possible beyond the physical, practical part on that, and seeing if there's virtual labs, if there's video demonstrations, if you can do an online simulation, anything else that could be handled in that, and whether or not everything else has to be punted until you can get back on your school ground. And again, that's kind of, like I've seen a couple different questions on that, of course, but that's kind of what has to happen at this point, and the decision you have to make. And that would be a good one to turn to the different, if it's a different oversight body, whether it be, like we said, any kind of council, governing board, whatever has ultimate authority over that program. If someone does, you know, turning to others within that sphere would be a good idea at this point to see kind of their best practices trade by trade. All right. And I believe with that,
Next,
I will hand it back to Mary Claire. Thank you, Mary Claire.
Thank you, Maya. Sorry for some of the clicks. I didn't always know exactly when a slide would end with that.
Oh, no problem.
All right, so that's all you need to know about distance learning in 45 minutes. There's a lot of information, and just some final considerations for you, and then we're going to talk about resources and take questions. Just to sum it up, just make sure IDL is the right choice for you, for your students and faculty. Choose the appropriate technology that best meets your student and curricula needs, and support your faculty and staff with necessary resources. I can remember one time when I was working in a school, I had the faculty were just overwhelmed, and because this is a lot, and it was a point where we were doing a big initiative, and one of the teachers said, "I just don't want to learn anything new." And it just struck me. He was just frustrated, and I totally understood it. And I said to him, but that's what we're asking our students every day. I think there's just going to be, there's a high level of a high curve for learning. And the instructors are just going to be, it's a lot for them to learn. So however you can support them would be great. And then also another thought was just don't be afraid. Encourage your instructors to reach out to students individually if they see a student is kind of going silent and they haven't heard, even if they could pick up the phone and call, because as Maya mentioned earlier, it's kind of like you're out there, it's like a black hole. And that one-on-one connection could really make a difference with the student. And one other thought was back about attendance. Academic assignments would be another way that you could keep track of attendance. So that's just something to keep in mind. Check the Department of Education's website frequently. It has, this is a changing landscape as we go. And then communicate, let ACCET know what your plans are. If you've decided to go the IDL way temporarily, just let us know, as we mentioned earlier. And I'm going to move on to some resources. So these are the federal guidelines. This presentation and this video, recording, and then a handout with resources will all be available to you and posted on our website by Monday, if not sooner. So here's guidelines for the Department of Ed and for SEVP, for the vocational schools who are offering training for N1 visa holders. And I know there's been some new information regarding SEVP that's just come out, and we have not really fully digested it yet, so we're working on that, but it's just things, as I said, things are changing. And then just some general resources. Inside Higher Ed and Chronicle, there's a lot of information out there. So many faculty who are doing online. If you go out and do some searches, they're just offering free webinars. There's all kinds of resources and people who are helping those who are going this emergency IDL route. So some of these articles will reference some of those. So I encourage you to review some of these and just do some searching. It's amazing. There's a really great academic community out there who's just trying to support everyone who's doing this for the first time in a hurried way. Again, some more resources for instructors about teaching online, teacher training videos, lots of stuff out there.
Well, we just wanted to, again, thank everybody for being with us today. Our contact information is posted. Please feel free to reach out to us. Also notice our phone numbers are listed, so you can reach us there as well, and we'd be happy to serve as a resource. Anything that comes to mind in the next few days, weeks, months, please, as always, reach out to us. We greatly appreciate being able to serve you in any way we can.